In my previous lesson, I talked about setting up Express with Node and creating routes. I'd like to continue on with the topic of Express routes and show how to include static HTML pages and forms within Express. So let's get started. All right, so go over to Visual Studio Code and open up a brand new folder. I'm going to call mine Express Forms. I happen to already have it open, but just so you can see that happen. All right, let's go ahead and set this up to be an Express application. So the first thing I'm going to do is type in npm init, and I'm going to take all the defaults just to get through this really quickly. It creates the package.json over there. Next step, npm install express, and that will create my folder over here, node modules, with all of the required libraries. Okay, to get a basic Hello World application going, I'm going to create a new file and call it index.js. First thing I'm going to do is import the library from the module. Then I'm going to create an app variable, which is an instance of Express. Right, now I'm going to create a default route here, app.get, and then request response, arrow function, and if you were following on previously, you could see response.send is one way we could send something to the page. So I could say hello world, and then we can start this by doing app.listen, tell what port to listen on. All right, let's go ahead and save this page and then see if it works. Node index.js, and I need to find a web browser somewhere. There we go, got one in another window. Bringing it over. Localhost port 3000, it worked, yay! Okay. So let's introduce the next topic then. As I talked about in a previous lesson, although I could right here create some HTML variable and pass it in right here and have that generate an entire web page for a route, that's not a really good way to do things. So let us first learn how to send in a static HTML file right here. And by static, I mean there's no dynamic content in there. It's just going to come straight from the server as it was saved in your folder directory. So first thing I'm going to do out here is right click and say new file, and I'll call this index.html. And in this page I could just do exclamation point and have this page, but I'm going to make a little bit more complicated one, and I'm going to steal from another window that I have open, and I'm going to paste in this form. So let me go ahead and hide this terminal. And then you can look at all of the form code. So if you'd like to stop the video and type that all in, you can. One of the things that doesn't exist right now is this style sheet. I'll worry about that later, but it's not going to break anything in the short term. But here's my page. It's a basic form, and I'm going to plan on posting eventually to job application as the route. It just has a couple of form fields, first name and last name, and then a button. So again, this is an employee application form, and we're going to see it served up to the end user in just a minute. All right, so in order to be able to have this be viewed by the end user, instead of response.send, we do response.send file, and we name the file that's listed over there. So index.html is that file. Now this is almost right. The default behavior of this particular method is that it looks in the root of your computer's hard drive. So if you're on a Windows machine, it's going to look for C://, and if you're on a Mac, it's going to look for /. So that's not going to work for us. We need to know dynamically which folder we're in on a computer, regardless of where this program gets installed someday. Because the big idea is that eventually you move this off of your local hard drive and put it on a server somewhere. So it needs to dynamically figure out where these files are sitting. So one thing I do is I use this line, let path equal require path. So this is a library or module that comes with Node. I don't have to import anything special. And what this does is it allows me to do things like construct a file path for passing into other functions like this one right here. And this one, I'm going to go ahead and use it right now. I'm going to say path.join, and this takes two different things. It takes two different paths and puts them together into one path. So I do path.join underscore underscore dir name. So even though we didn't declare it anywhere, this is a magic variable that's always available in your Express pages that indicates where the project is located or where this code is executing from. And so think about it, if I did like console.log of this particular thing, maybe I'll just do that for fun. I'll do console.log. It'll show you underscore underscore dir name. It'll show you what's there. It'll show you what folder path is associated with this project. All right, and then it'll put this together and return that particular page. All right, so let's watch all these things happen. So I'll hit save. I'll open my terminal back up. And now notice it put a number 2 there. Interesting. We're going to go back to 1. Because I have some experience, I knew that this terminal window was still open and that this code was still running. So I do a Control-C, and I start it back up again. And let's go over to our web browser once again. And I'm going to reload. All right, worked perfectly. So it did successfully serve up this page like a regular HTML page. If I right-click and do View Page Source, there's all the content that got sent here. So this is fantastic. Other things to note, down here in the console, it shows this list of folders that I have my application folder embedded in right now. So that's how that works. And so it just takes two different things, the folder and then this file name, and puts them together, and then it's able to send it back to the web browser. Okay, let's go ahead and do something now with this form. So this form says it's going to post to a route called job application. And to get started with, I'm going to change this to method equals get. And I'll show you why that's important in a little bit. All right, so the path is called job application. Let's make sure we remember that. Come over here, let's create a new route. App.get. And I copied a little, nope, I got just enough. Okay, so when people hit post on this or hit submit on this form, I want to do something here. Request and response, curly braces, and let's see, what shall I do? I'll do response.send hello from job app. This isn't the important part at this particular moment. What I want to do is demonstrate how I can read form fields from this form. So these input type equals text boxes. All right, so how do I do that? There is something that comes in to your route called a request object, and we can view the contents of that object. So, and what I want to do is I want to look in there for where the form variables are getting passed. So I'll do console.log request. So I'm going to put the whole thing in there. All right, I'll hit save, and I'm going to hit this little delete icon. Okay, and I will reopen my terminal so everything's nice and clean. And I'll go node index.js. All right, let's watch what happens. I'm going to bring this guy back over here, hit reload, and I'm going to type in my name, and I'll hit submit. All right, we can see that it sent my form variables as pairs, names and values, in the URL, and it got sent to the route called job application, and it correctly displayed hello from job app, so that's good. Let's see what happened with the console.log of the request that came in. I'm going to go ahead and just Control A, Control C with what's here, and then I'm going to get a new Word doc and bring it over here, and I'm going to paste it in and watch what happens. So if you'll notice here, it says page 20 of 20. So there were 20 pages of content in here. And if you look at the syntax, it's primarily name value pairs with curly braces. So what this is it's a big object with a lot of other nested objects in there. And we don't care about most of the information that's being sent to your application, but at least not all 20 pages worth. But one thing we are curious about is what happened to those form variables that got passed in, because when you're creating web applications, you're very often taking information from forms, and you want to handle that information somehow. So let's do a little Control F, and I'm going to try and find my name that I know I passed in, and it actually shows up in a number of places. So it shows up in the URL, and it shows up search. Anyway, these are all URL related things. It's just all kind of, at this point, duplicating what showed up in the query string, so there's a little duplication here. And if I keep on going, let's see what happens. Oops. Oh boy, I messed up. All right, so I'll just keep on going. All right, what I was looking for, and we're down here on page 17, so past those query strings, eventually I get to an attribute or an object called query, and it is an object that contains name value pairs, the exact same name value pairs that these attributes are the same values that were in my form. So if I come over here to my form and I see right here there's a name equals, so for however many form fields I have and as many name equals as there are, I'm going to see a name value pair show up in an object for those things, and I can read it as part of the query object. So let's go ahead and update my code so that we can watch that happen. So first off, I'm going to kill this terminal window, come back here, and instead of just all of the request, I'm going to do request.query because I just want a specific attribute within there. All right, so let's go ahead and start this again. All right, let me do node index.js to start this thing up again. And then I'm going to come over to here. I'll click back. I'll hit submit. And let's see what happened. All right, perfect. Just like I saw before in my Word doc, right here, this information that got passed in, the query object contained here in these curly braces holds these name value pairs. And in fact, I could take things like query.emp first, and that would be a top level variable, if you will. This is an attribute that I can read. All right, so let's go ahead and change this into something that's maybe a little bit more familiar. Let me steal those attributes and turn them into new variables. So I'll say let s first name equals that. Let's do let s last name equal request.query.emp last. Okay. And if I wanted to, I could just print that stuff out to the screen and it would work just fine. So the high-level idea here that's important is that I can read from my form as the information is passed in through this request.query object. I can read all of the form variables, turn them into other variables, and then do something productive with that. Oftentimes, we'll be, for example, taking a username and a password and then checking the database to see if that person exists, and then we're going to log them in. Or maybe we're going to save a record. In this case, if this is a complete job application with some more form fields, we could do some insert statement to a database right after retrieving those variables. So that's how we would use that. Okay, one other thing I would like to do before closing out this lesson and moving on to EJS, Embedded JavaScript, is I would like to augment that initial form page. Right now, if I come back to that, let's go ahead and pull up this page. If I go back to that form page and reload it, if I right-click on this and I say inspect, and I go to the console, it says there's an error, and the error is it didn't find style.css. Well, that makes sense. I haven't included it yet. So let's go ahead and figure out a way to do this. Now, I didn't do anything too special. The style sheet that I'm using, I just grabbed it off the web, and it changes the default font that's on the page. I certainly could do some other things that are more interesting, but just watch for the change in font when we're done with this. Okay, and this is an important thing when you're using Express is how do I combine static stuff like a style sheet that never changes with dynamic pages. And this is, I'll show you how we're going to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my style sheet, and this also could potentially be JavaScript or something else that doesn't change, and I'll put it in a new folder that I'm going to call public, if I can spell right, get my hands on the keyboard straight. And then within there, I'm going to create a new file, and it's going to be that one that I have named as a style sheet, style.css. There we go. Now I need to put some content in there, so I'm going to steal from another window. The only thing that's really going to matter here is probably the font family and size, really. There's some other things in here. I just grabbed a random one off the web, and this is just for a proof of concept. Okay, so we now have our folder, and we're referencing that style. Now, oddly enough, we're not saying, public/style, and the reason why we don't have to do that is because of the following thing that I'm about to type in. So we need to tell our Express application where our static content is. So I'll do app.use, and then I'll pass in this fancy stuff, express.static __ dir name plus /public. And this is saying that whenever a static asset is requested, like a style sheet or JavaScript, go look in this public folder. And I could put nested stuff in here. So for example, I could create within here a folder called style sheets and a folder called JavaScript. And then I could do something within my pages, things like I could, for example, type in style sheet or styles /style.css, or if I was including some JavaScript, I could do like JavaScript / and then some file.js. So that's how we would potentially organize and have a lot of static assets that we're going to be using in our pages. And so let's go ahead and check that this works. So I'll stop this and I'll start it again. Come back out over to this. And hopefully I got everything right. Let's watch for the font to change. Sweet. It just changed slightly, but it is different. Okay, there is one other thing that I wanted to talk about, and that is we did a form post and we used the get method. Now the downside of the get method is that whenever you pass something in a form like that, it shows up in the query string. And that can be bad because it's in your browser's history at that point, and if this were a public computer, people could see things like your username and password if we passed them that way. So what we typically do with forms is we pass things as post variables, and that makes them invisible. Okay. If we want to read form variables, though, that come by the method post, if I do that thing that I did before, which is display the request object, this is the old one. Once I've set the method equal to post, if I did that same experiment where I did console.log request, there's going to be no mention of any of my form fields or anything I passed in with it. So out of the box, the get method puts form information into the request object, but the post method from a form does not put anything in there. We have to augment our Express application a little bit in order to be able to retrieve that information. And so this is how we do that. I'm going to go over to here, and I have to add in an additional command here that says app.use express.url encoded, and then we put some instructions in here, extended true. So this syntax right here will allow form fields sent by post to show up into your request object. And there's another thing that we need to change. When we do a form post, it no longer goes to the get route. It only goes to post routes. So let me go ahead and I'll make a copy of this. I could have updated it, but I'm going to make a copy of it, and I'm going to say post, and let me go ahead and type in console.log, and let's look at our request object. So we're concerned about retrieving the variables that we had up here, but now we're going to be sending them via the method post from a form. So let's go ahead and see what happens. I'm going to go ahead and stop this, and I will close it. I'm going to remember to save this time, because that's always a handy thing to do if you want the code changes to show up. All right, let's do node index.js, start that up. Come back here, reload. I'm going to do a little view source just to make sure I've got the post method in here. I do. My changes have been captured. And then I will hit submit. All right. Down here, if I do a Control A, Control C, and then come back over to here, I'm going to replace Control A, Control V, replace the previous content. There's still 21 pages of content, but let's go ahead and type in my name. And unlike before, it only shows up in one place. There is an object in here called body, and in it I can retrieve the other attributes from the form. So what does that mean? So you see before where there's request.query. Well, in this case I use a different one. Maybe I'll just copy this. That'll make it easy, and I'll overwrite that. So for down here we do request.body. Oops. And that retrieves the variables that were sent in via the form post. So these guys right there are retrievable by using this syntax. And I'm going to go ahead and hit save to clean up the view a little bit. Okay, so again, the reason for retrieving these variables from a form post and putting them in some other variable is because we're getting ready to use them in database interactions. And also, we could take variables that are right here and embed them into a page. Up here, we saw how we did this send file, and it included what I would call a static page because nothing changes. But what we can do is we can serve up special HTML pages called, in this case, EJS pages, and we can take variables and we can pass them into those pages, and then we can dynamically replace certain parts of those pages with that information. So we'll learn about that in a future lesson on EJS.